Oh yeah, hey, Dale's face got covered by TBR.
Oh man, move over. This is all I got right here. This is all I got. This space.
Your face is limited.
Hello all, and welcome to TBRcon's panel on world building and your place in it. My name is Beth Kabler, and I'm the owner of Before We Go blog and one of the lead editors for Grimdark magazine. Thank you all for watching, and I just want to introduce our panel. We've got Angus Watson, Brian D. Anderson, Dale Lucas, Angela Boord, Travis Riddle, Jay Rushing, and I'm just going to let him go, ask some questions, and I feel like this is going to be a really fun panel. So thank you for tuning in. First off, panelists, please introduce yourselves. Tell us what you got going on. One by one, anybody?
Oh man! All right, fine. I'll break the seal. Hi, I'm Dale Lucas. I am the author of the Fifth Ward series, published by Orbit Books, consisting of 3 books: First Watch, Friendly Fire, and Good Company. I've also written a novel for Black Library, the folks who do Warhammer 40K and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and I'm working on another one for them now. Basically, I do like fantasy, horror, sort of modern pulp, and everything in between.
That sounds fantastic. Who's next?
Next.
Brian?
Am I top left-hand corner for everybody else, or is it just for me?
Yeah.
No, you're good.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Brian D. Anderson. The D is for a double dose of my poor writing. I was a indie author for many, many years. Wrote the Godling Chronicles, Dragon Vein. I co-authored the Akiri series with Stephen Saville, who some of you might know. I also wrote in the middle of a series called The Veil. And most recently, I signed a 3-book deal with Tor Books for The Sorcerer's Song, which this is the first book, The Bard's Blade. The second book is A Chorus of Fire, lovely covers done by a fantastic artist by the name of Felix Ortiz. So check him out if you get a chance. The final book in the series is coming out early next year, but probably in about 12 months. And I'm also finishing up the Akiri series, the Godling Chronicles sequel, and the last book in The Veil, all in some of them at the same time and most of them in order, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay. All right. Angus, go ahead and go.
Yeah, I'm Angus Watson. The cat's just come in. I am the author. I'm published by Orbit of 2 trilogies. The first is the Iron Age trilogy, which is a historical fantasy set in Iron Age Britain, where the Romans come over. And the second is You Die When You Die, which is Vikings in America 1,000 years ago, another trilogy. I'm currently working on a middle grade book set in an alternate universe when dinosaurs haven't died out. It's sort of cross between Harry Potter and the Flintstones.
Nice.
I've just moved house, which is why my background's not very simple. Sorry about that sort of stuff. It's a bit busy, I've just noticed. And I'm British, and I'm currently in England.
Jay, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jim. I just debuted my first novel this year, Radio. It's a fantasy noir set in 1928's Paris. It has the old gods and mind control and lots of dark shenanigans. It was SPFBO semifinalist, which was pretty great. I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I am an expat living in Switzerland and blog about writing and cocktails and random stuff.
Cool. Travis?
Hi, I'm Travis. I have self-published a few standalone books like Balam Spring and The Narrows and Spit and Song. And last year I started my first series called Houndstooth. Book 1 was Flesh Eater. And book 2, which is called Mother Pig, is coming out this summer.
All right. Angela?
Okay, I'm Angela Boord, and I am an indie author. My book Fortune's Fool plays second in SPFBO 5, which was the 2019-2020 version. It's Renaissance-based historical fantasy. And right now I have 2 books in that series, Fortune's Fool and Smuggler's Fortune, which is a long novella that's kind of a standalone prequel. I'm working on the second book in that series, and also a portal fantasy that's the first book in another series, and I hope to have both of those out this year. Otherwise, I guess I have 9 kids, and I homeschool in Mississippi, and that's my other claim to fame, I guess. But anyway, that's who I am.
I have no response to that whatsoever.
Nope.
Most people don't.
That is amazing.
Do you homeschool the whole time, or just because in pandemics?
No, the whole time. The whole time. We started when my oldest was young, so we've been doing it all the way through.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I homeschool too. Yeah.
My beard got grayer just thinking about that.
Yeah, they've all given me a few gray hairs.
Yeah.
I think
Can't believe it.
this year has given everybody gray hair.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably wouldn't do me any good. I mean, I've already messed up 1 kid. I can mess up 8 more.
All right. Well, let me give you my first question. Can you tell me what world building means to you as an author?
You want to just go in the order that we introduced ourselves?
Yeah, I just want people to speak up.
Oh, thanks a lot, Brian.
I don't want it so formal. We're just having a conversation.
I think world building is it's basically just establishing that illusion that whatever you're telling your story about, the place that you're telling your story about, and the people you're telling your story about, is something real and not just something that came right out of your head like it did. And while we usually think of world building as being a thing that just happens in fantastic fiction, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or whatever, I've always kind of felt like it really just applies to everything. Even if you're writing a realistic novel set in the everyday world, there's a certain amount of world building that goes into that because people have to believe whatever space you're writing about. And they have to kind of invest in it. So yeah, that's really what it all comes down to, is just finding ways to make all these things that just came out of your head seem like they have actual weight and heft to them.
Yeah.
For my part, world building for me is secondary. I enjoy world building a lot, but I always start with the plot, the characters, and the cast. I'm a firm believer that a good story can be put into any setting. And if you can't take your story out of one world and put it into, say, the Old West, and it not still be a good story with just a few minor adjustments, you might want to rethink what you're doing. So before I even start world building, I want to make sure that the plot and the premise to my story can translate into any world I want to put it in. And then I start with the world building, and then I tend to write more classic fantasy. So I've been greatly inspired by guys like Brandon Sanderson and Rothfuss and the way they go about it, and some of my more recent works. And to me, I think it's something that is very, very important, but also you can get entirely lost in and kind of leave your story behind if you get too deep into it.
Yeah, fair.
Sorry. For me, I've done historical fantasy so far. So world building is really a way to explore both literally and metaphorically a world which I'm fascinated in. So I can go to Iron Age Britain through reading everything there is to read about Iron Age Britain, which isn't that much. And also then go to Rome and read everything I can find about, well, some of the best stuff about Rome, I suppose, and live in that world for a while. And then literally in my series set in America, I got to drive between Chicago and Las Vegas twice. And what I love about the USA, which you don't really get in England, is that you can get up at dawn using sort of time jet lag against itself and go drive into a national park like Death Valley, for example, if you overshoot Las Vegas a bit on that journey. And you can drive your car and you can go up track and then you can walk half an hour and you can be somewhere where no one's been for a month or two. And it's exactly the same as it was 10,000 years ago, and really feel that you live in your world. And that's what world building is. World building for me is time travel, really. So far, I may well get more fantastical, and actually my current book is dinosaurs, so I get to learn about them. But yeah, I like the time travel, and also just the excuse to go to different places and walk about trying to thrash out a plot. That's it from me.
Yeah.
I think for me with world building, it's all about immersion. I think that the best world building is that which, like, basically all of the details are just kind of coming at you in the background, and you can focus on the character and the story and all the twists and turns that are coming at you without needing to think about the world. But at the same time, you can fully picture it. You feel a part of it. That's really what I try to strive for with world building.
Okay. What about you, Travis?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Brian, where my focus is more on like the characters rather than like whatever world I'm trying to create. But my books tend to be a lot more like character driven and kind of slow paced. And so the way I use the world is to like kind of show like how the characters interact with it, like the places they inhabit, like the cultures they come from and what activities they partake in and what food they eat, and use that to kind of like flesh out their characters and their dynamics between each other.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I find that doing that kind of world building to like come up with a type of cuisine or something and then have the characters sit down at a restaurant and just like eat and get to know each other. That's where a lot of my world building comes in.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as Travis. When I get an idea for a story, it's not the story's not there yet. It's just a character walks in, and then it's a matter of figuring out who they are, where they come from, what their story is, and in the process of that, figuring out who they are, their history, what has made them how they are today. They come from a world. So then I have to go figure out what this world is like, and as I'm putting the story together, then I'm figuring out, like little bits and pieces of, big pieces, like what the setting's going to be like, like where the places are that they're going to move through and who they're going to deal with, and what kind of attitudes the other characters are going to have, and what kind of confrontations they can set up because they have different beliefs or they have different histories or, whatever. So a lot of it generates plot. And then as I'm going through the story, writing the actual story, questions will occur to me along the way. And then I'll go in and I'll research those. And I write historical fantasy too, which is a little bit not set in actual history, but using history kind of like, as an analog, sort of a little bit, as an inspiration. So they're secondary fantasy worlds based on cultures here. And so I go and I look at time periods and stuff of what I want to do. And then I like fill in things about like food. And, if I get into, and I want to describe the smell of a soap and I think, gee, I wonder what Renaissance soap smelled like, then I'll go Google it. And that's kind of what world building is like.
The magic of Google.
Yeah.
I hate to think what Renaissance people smelled like.
Cloves. They smelled like cloves.
Like horse dung. They had to have smelled like horse dung. Permeating everything.
Zestfully clean, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Are there rules that y'all adhere to when you're creating your world? Like, is there, do you have a certain set of things that you try to adhere to? You're only going to describe, the food. You're only going to go so many levels, and that's your world building.
I mean, I know, and an interesting thing is, it's interesting that we have other folks here who do historical fantasy, because the first 2 books that I wrote that weren't published were that. One of them was set during the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, and one of them was set in ancient Egypt during the Roman occupation in the 2nd century. And also I, developed but never got around to writing all kinds of other things and researched all kinds of other places. I tend to approach my world building from a historical perspective. Even if I'm doing pure fantasy, I'm pulling from the stuff I do know about the past. But I think in the moment and in the book itself, it's just a matter of finding the right balance where obviously you want your world building to inform everything, but you don't want to bog people down with with too much detail or too much of this or too much of that. So that's more of a sort of an intuitive thing rather than a perfectly logical one for me. I just kind of have to find the sweet spot and figure out what's too much and what's too little.
Well, you can get bogged down in world building, and a lot of people, especially people who are really into it, who are coming out of say gaming, and where you do have to do a tremendous amount of detail because it's kind of a first person experience in the world. But for me, I try to pick maybe half a dozen primary focuses, and everything else that gets mentioned. But if I go into the monetary aspects of the world, the food lore, all these little details, I'm going to spend half a book doing nothing but describing this world, and that slams the brake on any kind of decent pacing I might establish. So a lot of what how much of the world I flesh out intentionally has to do with my pacing. If I set a fast pace for a book, the world can't be as fleshed out because it's just going to keep jamming the brakes on my pacing. It's going to shock the reader out of the story, and they're not going to have a good time. So I usually focus on religion, about 4 architecture, things of that, the big things. Yeah. And anything minor, I can drip and drab in there without the necessity for any kind of information dumps or anything like that. I can just drip it and drab it. I can even use them as vehicles to create suspense. I could mention an item that somebody's wearing around their neck, not give any explanation for it until 3 chapters later. But my main focus is usually on maybe half a dozen primary elements of a world. Okay,
it's a good rule.
I do something pretty similar. For me, I think of it kind of as I usually stick to 3 or 4 kind of big umbrella suspensions of disbelief. Okay. And that's it. Everything else is completely real world. And that way, if I can sneak those 3 ideas into the reader's head and they're on board with just those few things, then everything else trickles down from there. I can build a world that seems completely real so long as you believe these 3 things. And so there isn't this constant oh, that's new. Now I have to figure out how that works in the world. Oh, this is a new thing. Oh, how does this work in the world? It comes out in the beginning. It's up front, and then everything can just flow.
So you're not doing much of you're not doing a real steep learning curve. Then you're doing a kind of.
I try not to, and that's just who I am as a reader, and so that's just I pass that on to my writing.
That's a big style difference because
absolutely.
Authors write full world histories, so many levels deep, and they, as Brian said, they come from gaming backgrounds usually, and then they start writing the book, and they have this basically a repeated information to go from.
Well, the big thing about doing it that way is that it's perfectly okay to do it that way. You just need to be really smart about what you then decide to share with the reader.
Yeah.
Because just because you know it doesn't mean that they need to know it.
Yeah.
Well, Sanderson does it brilliantly. Think about the first book in the Stormlight Archives. and you're meeting Kaladin. He has slave brands on his forehead. You got Syl for the first time coming in. This is at the very beginning of the book. And you have no idea. He talks about rock buds and all sorts of stuff that can become important to this. You have no idea what any of this stuff is. And I think a lot of, especially aspiring writers, get afraid of that. And that's where the information dumps start coming in. They're afraid they're going to lose the reader if the reader doesn't understand everything that you're telling the reader. And it's like, no, that's really not going to happen. If the story is compelling, the reader will hang in there. Matter of fact, they'll hang in there just to find out what the hell that thing is.
True.
That leads into another good question. Like, when do you info dump? When is info dump not a bad word? You know, because is there any circumstances where you can use that in your writing and have it be successful?
You use it. Use info dumping to show off how much research you've done.
This is awesome. I have to share this with you.
Hang on a minute. All I'm doing is proving that I've read a few books, and hit delete. You're not allowed to do it, but it's very, very tempting to prove that you've read the books and done the bit. I mean, you can sort of do it if you're taking your character on a walk through town. You can say, and they passed a band who were wearing hats that had feathers in them, and their hair was styled with bear fat, and they were playing out. But you shouldn't. You should do it if they're having a fight and they use an antler bone flute to jab into the guy's face, because that's when you introduce the idea they had antler bone flutes.
And then say, did you know about the antler bone flutes?
Yeah.
You know,
so that's
text.
You now.
Also, I'm using footnotes at the moment, which I quite like, because writing a children's book, my protagonist is a 12-year-old who's not actually that interesting as a character, to be honest. He's, the bland protagonist. So it's nice that I can use the footnotes to be a sort of witty, cynical observer of his world. And I think it works quite well like that. Or at least I hope it does, although no publishers have snapped it up yet, so maybe it doesn't work that well.
Anybody else?
I try to avoid it for the most part, unless it's like a vital piece of information that like one character is telling to another character who doesn't know it. Otherwise, I'll throw out like terms and locations and things without any explanation, because I feel like that's just way more realistic. And it kind of just all comes back to the characters again for me, where like if my main character like doesn't know what this thing is, like with the narration style I do, he's not going to like be sitting there thinking about like the history of like you said, this antler bone flute or something. Like he doesn't know. He just knows that this thing exists, and so he accepts that.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about what you were just mentioning is kind of like a Watson character. That's actually a tool that a lot of writers do. You have somebody there that doesn't understand, so somebody has to explain it to them. Or you do like what Harry Potter did, and you experience the world as Harry Potter experiences the world.
Right.
That's a way to do. That's a way to do that. Info dumping. I did that a lot early on in my career. But what I learned was the less I do it, the more interesting the story becomes, because I get all these little aha moments that I can sprinkle out through everything that so the reader can say, oh yeah, I remember that from, back in chapter whatever. Oh, okay. So that's what that means. And I, like I said, there's no right way to do anything. There's no wrong and right way. A skilled storyteller can make it interesting. Just, conventional wisdom tells you, no, you shouldn't. But, I've seen it done effectively. If you're good enough, you can get away with damn near anything.
Well, I think, Brian, your point earlier is really important about letting pacing throttle all of your information drip. That's really vital. The second you start slowing anything down just to explain something, you're already losing the battle.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing I can't remember who it was, but some writer, they said something about it's always got to tie in with what a character is feeling about something. If you're going to stop the story to give the reader a bunch of information, it's got to be coming through the filter of the character that you're following and why that information matters to them. Why they need to know that, or why they're concerned about why things are the way they are, etc. So maybe that's a good rule of thumb, is how invested is your character in that information you're trying to get across to your reader.
Okay. Well, talking about footnotes, when do you think it's a good idea to use maps, footnotes, and dependencies in world building?
I mean, I love maps as just kind of a bonus thing. I'm the kind of guy that when I buy a book and it's got a cool map in it, I love the maps. I love making maps. But it's not necessarily a requirement. It's just kind of a cool extra.
Yeah, me as a reader, like I never refer to those maps, to be honest. It doesn't concern me really. But like as a writer for all of my stuff, I do just like draw out maps for myself so that I like can get the continuity right and I don't just screw up saying like where the geography is and names of places and things like that.
Yeah.
And I've also found it's been a fun kind of like writing exercise because I can make a map of like the whole country and like name a bunch of towns. And then I can just like pepper those into like the story, even if I wasn't thinking about them at the start of it, or it can like introduce like a narrative challenge for me. If like I put a river there and then all of a sudden the characters need to go that way. Now they have to deal with a river if I wasn't like planning on that in the first place. So I kind of like doing it and then like having to adhere to whatever I came up with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have maps and glossaries in my books because readers wanted them there. It's like I don't do all that stuff beforehand myself. I kind of do it more on the fly. I think I may be a little bit different than a lot of other writers because I don't generate like a lot of world building stuff before I start a story. I get like a basic level of understanding and a basic level of what the plot is going to be. And then I start writing and I do it in chunks. And sometimes I don't know what I need in a world until I get there. So I don't have like the giant documents. I have to generate those after the fact for the book when it's published. Basically, it's the glossary was the last thing I did for Fortune's Fool. Mm-hmm. And it was because people told me they wanted a glossary to refer to when they read a book, and people told me they liked that. So I did it. But that's the only reason. I will sometimes scrawl really scribbly maps in my notebook to try to figure out, like, especially if they're in a building and they're trying to get out of it and it's got like lots of hallways and whatever stuff, I'll draw myself a scribbly map and get really annoyed trying to get them out of a place. Like especially if I'm stuck, because I'm often stuck when I do that. But that's basically what I do. I don't use them a lot myself.
I think you don't need maps in the same way you don't need beer. I love
that's exactly right.
I like using a map even when I'm walking around somewhere, and I'm usually within reach of a map. I've got this because I love looking at maps the whole time, and I love having maps in my book. Unfortunately, I'm a terrible drawer, so I have to get someone. Well, so far I've got other people to draw my maps, and I've never been happy. Of course I have. They've been brilliant, but I think that I should be doing them myself to get exactly what I want. True. I like to find that habit.
They got some good apps these days that you can actually build a map with. I haven't used it myself, but I know some people who have. Tor made me put a map together for this thing. I usually don't include it in the book, but
I'm very lazy as well. It takes time, doesn't it?
It does.
I tried to use one of those map apps, the software, online software, and it didn't work out well. So I hired mine.
I've never tried.
Yeah, it was like the learning curve was hard, and it just looked like I had done it on a, that I was trying to learn a software. I was a very beginner, so I gave up. It was too much time.
The series I'm going to be working on after I finish the Sorcerer's Song this is a world with two separate continents with dozens of countries and cultures and stuff. So I'm going to have to do the map. There's no way around it, and it's just too big for me to keep track of it all in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if you're writing these long epics. You know what I mean? They sometimes you can just lose track of where you are. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Is it a problem with maps that they're difficult to see on a Kindle or e-reader?
They are.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
you run into like a similar problem with graphic novels. You know,
Yeah.
having to read a graphic novel, it's just not the same as reading them in a book.
Buy more paperbacks.
Tell me. Angus, the audience would like you to put "you don't need maps" in the same way you don't need beer on a shirt.
Yeah.
You can't have that Scottish of a first name and not need beer. I think there's a law about that.
And also, I want to remind the audience, if you guys have questions or anything you want to ask for the authors, put them in the chat, and we'll try and sneak them in. Okay?
I've just spotted the chat. It's quite busy.
It's very busy.
I'm a trained geographer. Likes maps.
Yes. The next question I have is, we've all been affected by 2020's real-world hellscape type events in some way or another. Do you allow real-world events to impact your world building, or do you in your story creation, or do you have like a line of demarcation? You don't like to let outside events affect the story. The world building.
I mean, I think that kind of just happens naturally.
Yeah.
It's almost like when people talk about writers having their social or their political ideas trickling into a book. You know, maybe setting out to write a tract is a bad idea, but you're a human being and you have opinions, and those things are just going to find their way in. So it's kind of the same with the stuff going on in the world around you.
Yeah.
It's just going to be there almost whether you want it to or not. In some way or another. Case in point, I've been working on a thing off and on for the last year that actually is historical and also fantastical, that takes place in New York in the 1920s. And I found myself referring constantly to the Spanish fever epidemic from 1918. And it ends up being this touchstone for a lot of the characters because almost everybody has lost somebody, and it's still fresh in recent memory. So, yeah, in a way like that, things do seep in. It happens.
I rarely touch on current events, but I mean, like you said, we're all a collection of our own stories and the stories that we've heard. And it's impossible for that not to bleed into your storytelling.
Yeah.
I mean, writing for me is
contemporary fiction.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah. Writing for me is kind of the way I process all this stuff in my head too, you know, all the emotions and thoughts and anyway. And so, you know, even like the imagery sometimes that comes out, sometimes it's not even like the issues that come out into the story, but just the imagery. I find myself using a lot of masks. I mean, I write, it's Renaissance inspired Italy, basically, and they used a lot of masks, but the masks keep getting more and more important, I think, in there. And plus too, I had started already before all the pandemic stuff happened, talking about, like, you know, I mean, the Renaissance, they had problems with fevers and stuff like that, but it just sort of gained in importance as some of the plot went on. And then I realized when I look back, I was like, oh no, I was already starting to hear this stuff, and it, you know, it was kind of coming out. So I kind of, it just sort of seeps in.
Yeah, that's good. We have a question from Arena. It says, what's a world building aspect of your own work that you think is unique and are particularly proud of?
Nothing.
Void. There's nothing.
I am under no delusions that I'm original. Everything. I'm a firm believer in that everything's been done. I'm just trying to put my own take on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to just, because setting matters to me as a touchstone. I like to travel when I'm able to travel. And to me, that's part of what fiction is. It's mental travel, and that's part of what world building is filling out that travel. So I really like having a strong sense of place in the stuff I do. And I feel like I've heard it from enough people now that I feel like I do that and do it well. But I always want to get better at that.
Mm-hmm. Are there any aspects of world building? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. It wasn't very interesting.
Oh.
You carry on.
Are there any aspects of world building that you guys shy away from?
I don't ever really talk about politics or anything that grandiose, both because I don't really like to write about such sort of like large scale conflicts like that, and also I'm an idiot and I don't really understand any of it myself, and I'm also lazy and I don't want to do like the research for it.
It's fair.
Yeah.
I just stick to smaller subjects that I know maybe a little bit about.
Okay. Anybody
I
else?
don't think anything's off limits. Personally, I know a lot of people get freaked out if they're tackling something that's not part of their own personal cultural history or something like that. But as long as you show the proper respect and do the research and don't misrepresent something, I don't feel there's anything that I wouldn't do that I would feel bad about it, so long as I didn't, half-ass it.
That kind of leads into my next.
But you have the
question.
right to half-ass it if you want, I think. I think it's important.
Yeah.
It's the right
And
if
people want the right not to buy my books.
Yeah, I know. You're right. Yeah, to be bad and research bad. You're allowed to do that.
I always find this kind of entertaining when talking to authors. I know some authors go on real deep dives into like a very specific thing. Yeah. Do you guys have any real specific things that you have gone on deep dives, such as like, I don't know, Renaissance buttons, or, Angela, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. I was just thinking, I don't think buttons. I don't think I've done buttons yet. That's probably the next thing.
it's something very like minutiae, but you've gone on a real deep dive and you know a whole lot about it now.
Hmm.
I forget everything pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I know I've done it,
it,
but I couldn't tell you what I've specifically done it with.
Yeah.
I was reading about the history of pipe smoking yesterday. And looking at pictures of pipes, but I don't really, that was because I didn't know anything about it. So
it has happened to me more than once.
I'm not being monitored because the FBI would have kicked my door down.
Oh, no kidding.
Look at the search history.
How do you build a bomb? How do you get rid of bombs?
Can I ask, did pipes originate on both sides of the Atlantic, or did one come from the other?
Okay, now you're gonna put me on the spot, but
Sorry, it's a nice.
no, I think it was both sides of the Atlantic, because in the old world they were very old, like clay pipes were around up until the 1800s, and they started being made out of different materials. But I believe they were used I'm fairly sure they were used in the New World as well. But
they were definitely used in the New World. But whether they developed in the old world before that, but I think they,
they did.
As well, smoking opium,
yeah,
apparently,
yeah. So that was, I don't know. I'll go back and check, but because I was looking at the New World stuff and around the 1700s. This is for my Portal Fantasy, so it was different. It was not Renaissance stuff, but and that is probably the one thing I did throw them into. They're in my Renaissance, but I didn't check that out. I did check out how to make coffee when coffee made it to Venice, and how they made coffee, and that sort of thing. It was basically, and those things end up being like 3 sentences.
I remember first thing I had to look up when I first started writing fantasy was how far a horse can travel in a day.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
And do 20 miles.
20 miles.
Oh, no.
Yeah. 20, 30 if you really press it and you have a sturdy horse.
Yeah,
Stop and wipe them down.
It's funny. I'm a very modern suburban kid, and somehow I ended up writing all of these, whether it was historical fantasy or actual fantasy, that's all out in the country, dealing with forests and horses. And I don't know anything about this shit. I really don't. So
That's why you go on the deep dives.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Pre-industrial technology. I know more about that than I did. You know, I've read books on medieval technology, anything pre-industrial.
Yeah.
You know, you a lot more about ancient religions than I ever knew. You know, I mean, so I'm not sitting there pulling directly from any one religion, but just sort of a mishmash of different aspects that fit the plot. You know, I mean, you learn as you go. I mean, the thing what you need to know, and luckily we live in an age that this kind of information is readily available. 20 years ago, it would have been a lot harder.
Keep the library all the time.
Oh yeah.
I got a great question here for historical fiction writers. Is historical fiction world building more difficult than creating your own world? This from G.R. Matthews.
I mean,
no, just Google it. It's easy.
You're creating less, but you have way more pressure on accuracy.
Right. Because there's always an expert out there who knows exactly what you're talking about, and they know it better than you do.
Yeah.
Probably like writing hard science fiction, you got to get the science right.
Yeah.
Someone once got on to me for a character in my book having genes, and it's a completely like fantasy world. And so I'm just thinking like, why can genes not have been invented in this world?
Yeah.
I had one
because I say they don't.
In Age of Iron, I had somebody wrote to me and said that it's an unpleasant character who used a derogatory term about women. Well, not that derogatory term. He said a woman was hot, and it was actually a review, 1 star. I hardly think they would have used the word hot to describe a woman in the Iron Age. And I said, well, I agree, but they also wouldn't have used the word chair or and or hello because and I think they may well have had a base derogatory term to describe women's attractiveness, and I think that, that's a problem. I think most of the attacks you get are on that sort of level.
Yeah.
With accuracy, because as you say, with historical novels nowadays, you can sit there and you go, no, did they have horseshoes in 100 BC? And you can find out really, really quickly. So there's no real excuse. You can check it and check it again. And if you do something like put longbows into a book before they were invented, you could just say, well, actually, historians don't know that much. We've only got the sources we've got, and I'm saying there were longbows.
Yeah, it's your world. You're the god of your own world. It's your
Writer's choice.
Yeah.
That's what makes it. That's what's the beauty part of writing high fantasy, because you ain't gonna worry about it.
Well, I cheated, and I just base mine on history. Like, it's not history, but it's based on history, so I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Like,
I
get the best of both worlds.
Well, that's why I write British Iron Age, because there's not much known.
Yeah.
I have a cultural question for you guys. How does a writer be sensitive to your worlds if they're inspired by, say, like wuxia or the worlds of indigenous peoples? How do you strike that balance of being sensitive to the culture but still being able to expound on it and, create your own world on top of it?
You just try not to be stereotypical was the first step.
Yeah.
When I write indigenous peoples into my worlds, they're not all dark skinned with long hair, wearing animal skins. If they're wearing animal skins, they can look any kind of different ways. Mm-hmm. And that's first and foremost, you find out what the stereotypes for that the more ignorant out there might spout off, and avoid that. You do your best to be respectful, and you do your best, do your research, and don't fall into that trap of every Native American style culture looks like Native Americans. Why do they have to look like that? You're writing fantasy; they can look any way you want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, having written about Native Americans, a lot of them didn't look like Native Americans. You know, there was a colossal variety, which is, you know, something you discover as you delve into history, which I think is part of the reason you should delve into these histories. There are ideas that you shouldn't write about cultures that aren't yours and that you don't belong to. I disagree with that strongly. I think, you know, you shouldn't let where you're from hold you back in what you do or say or observe. But I do, at the same time, realize that other people don't think that. And I think you have to listen. I think I was watching an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm earlier on today as I unpacked the boxes, and they're over there. No, they're not. Yeah, there we go. And Larry David was suggesting that every waiter in the restaurant he was investing in should have a bell on the table so you can call a waiter. And obviously that's massively insensitive, and everyone who hears the idea is horrified. But for him, from his point of view, it seems like quite a good idea, and for any, you know, you can see why. And I'm aware that I can be the Larry David, and so I think the key thing is to listen to people. So if you have written about these subjects, listen to your editors, and if you don't have editors, get friends to read it and listen to them, and take what they say on board, and don't dismiss it as nonsense because you think you know better.
Yeah, I hired sensitivity readers. Yeah. So I have hired sensitivity readers for Smuggler's Fortune. I hired them for Fool's Promise, which I'm writing right now, and then my Portal Fantasy I also use some. And they, you know, it's I try to be, you know, I want my characters to be people first and foremost. So if you're treating your characters with respect, then that's the first step, right? They're people, and not ideas or cardboard cutouts, or they're. And then I do send it to. I try to find readers who have the cultural background from what I'm trying to write from, and then I'll, you know, give it to them, and they'll usually point out places where I've you know, left gaps. I haven't dealt with issues that I should have dealt with, or maybe that I've, you know, accidentally done something that I, you know, written something some way that I shouldn't have written. So I think listening is key. You need to like be open and just listen to what people are telling you.
Yeah.
Like what Nico Project X said, hashtag cancel jeans.
That's another thing to put on a t-shirt.
Well, I think POV matters a lot too. You know, as we're researching cultures and religions and things like that, as the author, you have a point of view and you're looking out at it.
Right.
And if you're writing that in your book, that's just as normal. But if you're getting into somebody else's head, that's a completely different can of worms. And that's going to take a lot more research and a lot more talking with people, listening to people. That's where things get a little bit more hairy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to tackle like something that's completely alien to you, I mean, if say you're going to write a story, one of the main characters, you say you're writing something contemporary and the character's trans, unless you have a deep knowledge of what, and not just know one person, like have a deep knowledge of what the trans community goes through, what these people think, how they feel, not just one person, like really get to know what from their perspective, what it's like. Then you probably shouldn't go there unless, you know, because all you're going to do is piss people off for no good reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Why is it a very important question? Why are you doing it? What purpose is it serving?
Yeah. Is there a reason for it? You know, I mean, are you doing this just to be controversial? Does it do anything for the story? Mm-hmm. You want to have as much representation as you can, but you also want to do it properly. Yeah. You know, you don't want to misrepresent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I know that you all write fantasy novels of all sorts. You guys have books span the gamut of the fantasy genre. How do you think world building differs in the different subgenres of fantasy? Like, would you say world building in grimdark novels needs certain things versus urban fantasy versus high fantasy? You know, are there certain things that the audience expects because it's a different subgenre?
I think so. I mean, you got to know your genre if you're writing in it. You know, you got to be steeped in that particular knowledge and know what readers are looking for. You know, and I think that's just intelligent to do that.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, but it's all going to really boil down to the story. If it's a good story, it's a good story. Readers will like it, even if you do something outside the constraints of what's typical for your genre.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having a clear idea of what you're trying to do in narrative terms is in a way, I think, more important than understanding what the conventions of the genre are. But that matters too. You want to bring both of those things together, what the reader is expecting, and then what you're specifically trying to achieve, and figure out the best way to present that.
And so the further you stray from our reality, the further you have to be aware that your world will affect your world, as it were. Yeah. So that if it's got a particularly strong magic, or if you've got dragons, you've got to have a look at how people build castles, for example.
Yeah.
Teleportation, you know, how is that going to affect social structures and everything like that, and privacy. Yeah. So basically, the further you go from the normal world, I think probably the harder it is, or certainly the more of a balancing act you have to do.
Yeah. Well, and that actually brings up something that I've often thought about, especially where it comes to fantasy and sci-fi, is trying to find a way to establish what's normal in this fantastical setting that you've got. If that is often one of the hardest things. People come to the book maybe knowing that there's going to be magic, or there's going to be dragons, or there's going to be spaceships, or whatever, but trying to quickly and efficiently get across, this is what a normal day is like for a person in a world like this, and this is what they're used to, and this is completely off the grid from that.
I think Tolkien does that brilliantly. I know everybody refers to Tolkien a lot. You know, he's kind of the godfather of high fantasy.
Yeah.
But the way he opens it up in the Shire,
yeah,
and it's this daily life. I actually did the by request. I had a different the Bard's Blade, the first book of the Tor series.
Mm-hmm.
It was a completely different opening. It was action opening, which is conventional wisdom says open it with a bang. But they said, when they described what they wanted me to do, I was like, you mean you wanted me to do sort of a long expected party type thing? and they, I mean, not written like Tolkien, obviously, but
right.
You know, but with that sort of same feel. And so I did that with a day-to-day life, and where you're experiencing what a normal day or even a bad day in somebody's world is. I think that's, you got to hit the nail on the head there. Yeah. Establishing your norm, establishing something like that's really important.
Yeah.
And I do think something like in the subgenre of like slice of life, the world building could be a lot more important, because that genre is basically all about sitting with the characters and like being immersed in that world. So like you as a writer really want to get those details right and really present the world in a detailed, believable way.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, what you said about teleportation, how does that affect other aspects? If you know, even if you're doing a caste structure for society, how does that affect the daily lives of different people within your world? So you're going to have to establish, you know, I mean, there's going to be rich and poor unless you're doing a more, you know, sort of utopian style where everybody has the same amount, which is uncommon. You know, so you're going to have to establish not just one, but several different daily routines and perspectives, depending on, you know, depending on where in the world you happen to be at any given moment.
And nudity can't be taboo anymore, because anyone might pop up at any second.
You know, and I also know that you guys have written novels of all different lengths. You know, some of you have written short stories, some of you have written novellas. Can you tell me a little bit about the difference in world building that you have to do in, say, like a novella or a short story versus a regular size novel?
I mean, for me, I think with a short story, you're really mood building more so than you are world building.
Okay.
It's all about what your characters are feeling, what you want your readers to be feeling, and then you're just getting these little slices of the world, but trying to flesh something out isn't nearly as possible, let alone important.
Right.
Yeah.
30 pages to.
Fond du La's really good. John Bob, love me some Fond du La.
Oh
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Jade books are fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm because I'm a fussy sort of a research junkie, and I can often spend a lot of time even for a short story, depending on what I need for the story. And the main difference is that whereas with a novel, I might do a lot of prep beforehand, with a short story, I might take a shot at a first draft without worrying about it. But then before I do a second draft, I'm going to sit down and say, okay, what do I need to know here? And how deep do I need to go into it? And then I can often spend a lot of time finding information just to put a sentence here and a sentence there.
Mhm.
But I don't recommend that. That's just how I roll.
I think it also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it also depends on like whether you're writing a short story or a novella in a world that you've developed already, you know, or you're just writing a standalone. Because the short stories and novellas in the already made worlds in the wider universes, they're just ways to like kind of focus in on one aspect or one character and show like the smaller sphere, I guess, that those characters move in. So you're just taking like a little bit of the world instead of being able to spin it out more like in a longer novel.
And it's easier if you have more of that world fleshed out. Say if you're writing that short story after the first couple books in a series, so you're not, and it depends on if you're if you're a discovery writer or if you're an outliner, I mean, that'll impact it tremendously. I'm a little bit of both. I try to outline, and then about halfway through the outline, it collapses because I get another idea.
I love the idea that a short story can just take part in a sort of little cul-de-sac in a great big fantastical world. Like I've just read to my youngest George's Marvelous Medicine as his nighttime book, and in that book by Roald Dahl, it's completely okay that the granny grows to 80 feet tall and bursts through the house. Apart from that, there's nothing particularly well. Actually, animals grow as well. But you just wonder what else is going on in this world that this happens, and everyone goes, "Oh, look, granny's growing 80 foot tall," and that's weird, but not a massive surprise.
Yeah.
So I love that aspect of a sort of bracketed little bit from a huge world you can imagine. And there's nothing else in that world. Just imagine it yourself.
That reminds me of Neil Gaiman's short story. I think, what is it? Thankful for the milk, or thank goodness for the milk, where he's just going. Has anybody read this short story?
I know which one you're talking about, but I can't remember the title either.
Yeah, because it's a slice of life, and it's just a father like, oh, I gotta go get milk, and then all of the crazy things that happen while he's going to go get milk, and it's all just a slice of life. Accepted that he's going to be in a hot air balloon and he's going to do all this other stuff.
Yeah, if I had Neil Gaiman's mind, I'd be doing stuff like that too.
Yeah.
What it must have been like to be in the head of Terry Pratchett. My God, creating Discworld. Oh my God, one of my favorite all-time worlds to read.
Discworld is fantastic.
Oh my God. Y'all ever seen the story Neil Gaiman told about his friendship with Terry Pratchett? Pratchett would like lose his mind and get like really angry and furious, and it was like just so just the complete opposite of what you would imagine somebody who wrote The Color of Magic would be like.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any worlds that you have read that you have found inspirational or remarkable in their creation? I know we mentioned Fond du La. Is there any of you guys really think is incredible?
Nicholas.
Yeah, the stuff in I made a point of the year that First Watch came out. I tried to read all the other Orbit debuts that year. I was not successful because I'm a very slow reader. But just among that group, there were so many. Like R.J. Barker is amazing. Yeah. And yeah, like the whole Jade City and that series was so cool. And speaking of Renaissance Italy, Melissa, her last name is escaping me, but her stuff is great too, and it's based on like Renaissance Italy. Oh man, now it's killing me.
Is it Caruso?
Melissa Caruso. That's it. I'm getting old. There are bubbles in my brain. I can't remember all these things. So, but yeah, no, there's, I mean, that's half the reason we read this stuff is because we love finding some new world. It doesn't even have to be all that different from something we've found before. It's just the way the person brings it to life, the way that they describe it, the particular details they choose to deploy. Like that's what makes it special.
Have you read Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time?
Yes.
It's the opposite of that. It's not the small details. It's the fact that it's basically what happens. Actually, spoiler alert. If you're going to read it, stop listening now. But not a massive spoiler alert. Basically, spiders get super developed on a planet and start their own civilizations and discover, air travel, space exploration. And the way he builds this world and makes it believable in sort of spider tech is just astonishing. And it's very, very intelligent and makes you amazed by the guy.
Yeah.
I just.
And there's Robert Jordan, of course. Wheel of Time. I mean, that's a.
Yeah.
I remember reading that for the first time. It took me twice. I didn't like the intro. Kind of bored me a little bit, and it took me. And then I picked it back up because I heard how great it was. And so I get through it, and as I'm getting going through this, I'm seeing how massive this world is, and I'm like, how is he keeping track of all this? This was before I wrote my first novel, and I'm like, my God. Yeah, I mean, just the enormity of that world and the complexity that he came up with. And to me, that was so inspiring. I mean, even if you don't, even if that's not really your thing, if Wheel of Time's not your thing, you got to respect the work that went into that and what he was able to accomplish over the course of his life.
Well, that's what I kind of feel like about China Miéville's stuff is I can't really connect with it on an emotional level, but his world building and his imagination is unreal. It's incredible. So that's kind of a lesson in books that I can settle into, even if they're not entirely going to ring my bell, so to speak. I can still appreciate getting into them and just wandering around in that space.
Appreciate them for what they are instead of worrying about what they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Anderson's got
one book that really is an archetype for one that I really try to think about a lot when I'm writing is World War Z.
Yeah.
And just how it's more nonfiction than a lot of nonfiction books.
It was so good.
But then zombies. And just making a world believable. It's probably the best I've read.
Yeah.
For that specific trait.
Anne Rice was really good at bringing worlds to life. And especially, she could tell she lived in New Orleans when she wrote about New Orleans. My God. I live about an hour and 45 minutes away from New Orleans. And I remember reading that book and going, yeah, she definitely lives here somewhere. And that's before I knew that she was from New Orleans. So she's either spent a lot of time here, and it was you could almost smell it.
Yeah.
The way she did that.
There's an author who's writing right now. Have you guys read? I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce his name right. P.D. Gillet Clark. You guys know?
I've read his novellas.
I haven't read him yet.
And his work has like that. Would you say that New Orleans feel to it? Wrote Ring Shout and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Making a note.
The TBR.
He was the one. I don't remember the full title, but it was something with Tramcar in it.
Yeah, it's The Haunting of Tramcar 14.
Yeah.
one-off.
His world building is just like.
Well, that's what I liked about Nick Eames's books. It was like going through a D&D campaign, except it was just. I mean, yeah, he had bugbears in it. My God, how cool is that?
It had everything before that thing was done. Like everything in the kitchen sink was in there.
Yeah, right. I was like, oh my God, loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
Another one that I love because of just how like intricate it is, and also how extremely weird it is the Tower of Babel from Josiah Bancroft's series. That's one of my favorite like recent new worlds.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
I really like those books. I like K.S. Veloso's Wolf of Yarrow and that series too. And she had a scene that really got me. I think it's in XR Falcon, where the character is she's finally like away from everybody and she's feeling safe. Like there's not a lot of people around, and so she's finally feeling safe enough to eat with her hands, like they do in their own country. And that to me was like, that's just. I remember that as being like, it was such a simple thing and like just a couple paragraphs of scene, and it said so much about the world and the character. You know, there was no explaining, there was no, it just, you saw that and felt the emotion, and it like said everything about the entire world. That was just an amazing thing.
I'm constantly blown away by other writers, man. I'm just, every time I pick up a new book, there's so much great talent out there, and this is a good time to be a fantasy writer. It's
a fantasy reader.
Yeah. There's so many great writers out there. I know the '80s gets a bad rap for the shallow, because they were pulping out a bunch of, trying to recapture. But you got to think Terry Brooks came out with Magic Kingdom for sale during that era. Mm-hmm. That was when Anne McCaffrey was hot. That was that was when all of the Dragon Riders was. I know it came out in the '70s, but it was like very popular out through the '80s, and all the way up into today. I'm just constantly, every book I pick up, I'm just constantly amazed by just the level of talent and creativity.
Outside books
come out in the '80s too. The Belgariad and the Malorian.
Yeah, that was the '80s.
Yeah. It's hugely influential on readers and writers alike.
What I like, and we're going to see more of, is the worlds in games. Like I love the worlds in Fallout, the newer Fallout games.
Mm-hmm.
A game called Fallout New Vegas, which takes part all around Las Vegas, and the Mojave Desert, which I particularly love.
Final Fantasy X.
Yeah.
I'm a Borderlands player. I have 1,000 hours on Borderlands.
Yeah.
600 hours on Borderlands 3. And the world is just fantastic.
Yeah, I used to have a life. I used to be able to play games, but
yeah, I turned my son on to D&D. Now he has every book on the planet, like freaking these dice that are made of, looks like it's like gemstones or something. And I'm like, and all his friends are playing that, and they're into gaming. He's actually going to go to college. He wants to go to college for game design.
Yeah, so, actually, I get to play Zelda with my kid, the Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is just astonishing. Where you can stand on a mountain and look over miles of scenery and know all the little bits in between, and you can go there.
Yeah.
Well, I got to be super dad and introduced him to Andy Gavin, who was the founder of Naughty Dog Games. So I've known Andy for a while, and my son wants to do this, so I got him on the phone with Andy, and I was like, "Yes, I'm super dad."
Dad points. We've got a question from viewer Arena. What's one real world idea, aspect, or culture you'd like to write about? Something that you're interested in.
I read the other day that ancient humans hibernated.
I'd be happy to join the D&D game.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of going back a bit, going Neanderthal. When the Neanderthals and ancient humans met, that's what I might look at next.
Okay.
Yeah, since I never got to publish those first couple of historical fantasy books I wrote, I'd still like to find a way to at least repurpose some of that knowledge. So either Aztec Mexico or ancient Rome, especially the provinces like Egypt.
Rome is the gift that gives forever.
Yeah.
You go all the way from pre-imperial Rome all the way to Eastern Empire, and you have just this wealth, of material to draw from.
Endless stuff.
1,500 years or something.
Yeah,
it spanned 1,500 years.
I think the Roman Empire rose right around, well, not as an empire, but as a powerful nation, around 200 BC, when it was just it was a monarchy that became a republic, then went back to basically a monarchy, and with, of course, Julius Caesar, and all that. But but even after that, it goes, when the Western Empire fell, people always think when Rome fell, that was the end of Rome. It wasn't. It wasn't nowhere near the end of Rome. It went on for hundreds and hundreds of years after the fall of Rome, based in Constantinople.
Yeah, what's that coming
from? So that's all the questions I've got. Is there any questions from the audience? Anything?
She said she had a question for Travis.
So there's a question for Travis here.
Uh-oh.
While writing Flesh Eater, was it hard building the relationship between Cole and, is that Lilio?
I assume. Yeah.
Or was it easy because of all the similarities?
It was, once you get to really know your characters and their personalities and just the way they behave and interact with each other, I feel like building a relationship between them, whether it's a positive relationship or a negative one, which the book 2 in my series is going to have a lot of negative relationships between people.
Sure.
Building those just comes really natural because you know how these people are going to butt heads or how they're going to mesh well. So I found it really easy and really organic, and that relationship was actually not even part of any of the outline for the book. And it happened because it came so naturally. It just happened in the story and then became a central aspect of the entire series now.
Okay. I'm gonna cut this to 2 more questions because we're really going here. Dale, would you explore the world of Fifth Watch in the future?
I'd love to. Yeah. Right now there are no definitive plans for more books. But I would love to have the opportunity to go back to that world and do some more stuff there, because I love those characters and I love that setting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would love to do that at some point.
Okay. I'm going to leave this last question from Zach Argyle. Are there any bits of world building that you had in your first draft, but then you removed later?
Yes.
Yes, period.
Oh my God. When I wrote the first draft of the Bard's Blade, there was a whole race of people called the Sylvan. And I sent it to the editor. I had to genocide a whole bunch of them.
It was a bad day.
They were gone. And I'm like, but they got pointed ears, man. What the hell? Who doesn't like pointed ears? So yes, I was very sad about it.
all the time with some kind of like cool little detail, like some little thing that you're like, oh man, I can't wait to get this in there. And then along the way, you're just like, damn it, it doesn't fit. It's gotta come out.
Yeah, I had to learn so much 1920s slang.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't had to, I got to. It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I realized really quickly that it was just going to turn into a cartoon if I included as much as I wanted to. So I had to just keep constantly pulling it back out and back out just so it didn't sound so silly.
Yeah.
Whenever I take a big bit out, I put it in a different document, which I call offcuts for each book, thinking it's so good, there's so much of it, I put so much time in, I'll definitely use that again. And I've never looked at any of that ever again.
All right. So let's just to finish off. I know that you guys introduced your books and stuff when we first started, but we have actually picked up a lot of people who probably didn't see the first question. So if you want to just briefly tell us about what you got going on for 2021.
Okay. My past stuff is the Fifth Ward series from Orbit Books, consisting of First Watch, Friendly Fire, and Good Company. And last summer, I released Realm Lords, which was a novel I did for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, a tie-in book. And I've done a couple pieces of short fiction for them that have appeared in some of their anthologies as well. The new Dire Chasm anthology and also Oaths and Conquests. So
I'm currently wrapping up the final book of the Godwin Chronicles sequel. And then I'll be finishing up the final book of the Sorcerer's Song series for Tor Books.
That's exciting.
And then I'll be everything I'm writing right now are finales, series finales.
That's
so I'm writing the last book in the Akiri series, and the last book in the Veil series. And so yeah, so I'm going to be a busy kid.
Busy's good. Angus, what about you? What do you got going on for 2021?
I'm working on my kids' book, which is a middle grade book set in a world where dinosaurs never die out and have replaced vehicles, and all mechanisms are now dinosaurs. So instead of aircon, you have a big dinosaur with massive wings wafting across the snow to cool buildings down. They're bred to be happy doing this. They've all been sort of bred by humans over millions of years. So that's the one to look out for from me. But given my sales figures in America, you probably haven't read any of my stuff. So I'd start with Age of Iron, my first one, and if you like that, read the rest.
I had my debut novel, Radio, came out this year. There it is. It's $1.99 for Kindle right now if people are interested. I was an SPFBO semifinalist, so that was awesome. I'm hoping to get another book out in 2022, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
Travis, what about you?
I've got a few standalones out that you can read if you don't want to commit to a series. I've got Balam Spring and The Narrows and Spit and Song. And last October, I put out book 1 of my first series. It's called Flesh Eater. And the sequel is called Mother Pig, and it's coming out this summer. And then the finale will be out in February after that.
Okay, my series is the Tyrian Empire series. Fortune's Fool placed second in Spiffo 5, which was the one before this one. It is a very large book. It's book 1 in the series, and if you would rather kind of dip your toes in with a smaller book, I have Smuggler's Fortune, which is technically a novella, but it's kind of on the borderline between it and a short novel, which is kind of a prequel standalone about some of the same characters. And I'm working on the sequel to Fortune's Fool called Fool's Promise, and I'm in revisions with that and planning on getting that out this year. And I'm also in revisions for Portal Fantasy, which I still haven't decided on a title for that one, but it is in revisions, and I'm planning on getting that one out this year too. That's a completely different series, which is kind of a Cold War espionage it's quantum magic thing crossed with a North American kind of setting. So I'm excited about that one too.
All right. Well, I just want to thank all the authors for taking some time and sitting down with us and talking about world building. This was a really fun panel.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks for
good.
the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everybody who came to the audience and asked great questions too. So y'all have a really great day. Check out some of the other panels and we'll see you later.
Yeah.